Again, my name is Amer. I am a Palestinian American. I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm also a writer and an author. I'm also a law professor at the University of Detroit Mercy, where I teach on Arab American issues, specifically on race, critical race theory, and those kinds of things. And I've written a lot on Palestine, and I perform in Palestine all the time, 3 or 4 times a year. And I founded a couple comedy festivals. One is called the Dearborn Comedy Fest, the 1001 Laughs Dearborn Comedy Festival, which is now since 5th year in Dearborn, Michigan. And then also the 1001 Laughs Palestine Comedy Festival, which this summer will be in its 3rd year in Palestine, where we take comedians and we do 5 days of stand-up comedy in Ramallah, Jerusalem, and Bethlehem. I want to start out talking a little bit about the idea of one state. If you look at what Israel's been doing for the past 70 years, it's pretty clear, and especially after 1967, that they want all the land. Okay? We have this triangle of land that we call Palestine. That's why we call ourselves Palestinians, because we're from that place. And Israel's made it very clear that they want all the land. Currently, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000 settlers inside the West Bank. Some of the biggest cities, even compared to cities that are inside the Green Line or inside Israel, exist in the West Bank. So huge complexes like Modi'in, Ma'ale Adomim, which are around Jerusalem, and Ariel, which is one of the largest settlements in the West Bank near Nablus. And they've built a university there. Okay, generally, when you build a university, you're probably not going anywhere, or do you have plans to go anywhere? So they've decided that they're not going anywhere. They've decided that the West Bank, at least, is part of Israel. Gaza is another conversation, but they want Gaza too. Not only for maybe some biblical purposes, but also they have found natural gas off of Gaza. And generally, you don't bomb places you don't want, generally. I mean, people usually bomb places they want. We bombed Iraq. Now it has the biggest U.S. embassy in the world. So generally, you don't bomb places you don't want in some way or another. So Israel has decided that it's not going anywhere. What they have not come to terms with yet is the fact that we are not going anywhere either, we Palestinians. They've tried very hard to get rid of us over the past 70 years, and it's not going very well. They're not very good at it. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. There's been many of us talking about one state for a very long time. In fact, Edward Said wrote about it in the early 90s, before Oslo even, talking about one secular democratic state in all of historic Palestine, or Mandate Palestine, or whatever you want to call it. But it came back up a little bit early this year when our president was at this press conference with Netanyahu. At the press conference. Let me be straight. At a press conference with Netanyahu in the White House, and he said one state, two state, whatever. Whatever they want. Basically that's what he said. And because I'm sure Netanyahu was in his ear about this. Of course, one state to Netanyahu means something different than what we're going to talk about today. One state to them means get all the land, somehow figure out how to get rid of the people, or to classify them in some way as in which you don't need to deal with them. And of course, we mean it there's Lamis. So we mean it in a very different way. So we talk about it obviously in a different way. When we talk about one state, we're talking about one secular democratic state without any regard to ethnic supremacy or religious supremacy or anything like that. It should not sound like that crazy of an idea, but that's what we're talking about when we talk about it. Israel somehow maintains this. I heard Ilan Pappé give a talk a couple months ago where, and he has said this many times, where he said basically it functions as one state now. Basically you have one state in Palestine now, just with different classifications for different groups of people. In many ways, that's true. Israel's created a structure in which Palestinians are sort of classified into 5 different groups of people, right? You have the Palestinians who live in the West Bank, who have one legal classification under the Israeli system. You have Palestinians who live in Gaza who have a different legal classification under the Israeli system. You have Palestinians who live in Jerusalem who are permanent residents of the state without national voting rights, only local voting rights, get benefits from the state like health care and whatnot, but can't vote for their prime minister. And then you have Palestinians who live inside of Israel who are technically full Israeli citizens, but of course marginalized greatly by the state. For instance, majority Arab schools or fully Arab schools get $1 for every student, whereas or they get $1 for every $3 that Jewish students get in public schools there. And then, of course, you have Palestinians who live in the diaspora, who have a totally different legal status, basically sort of non-existent legal status as far as Israel is concerned. But we're talking about a secular democratic state where anybody can live freely. Now, I have 6 reasons why I think one state would work and should work very well. First of all, the first reason is what I call the Solomon effect. Okay? This is the don't split the baby in half effect. If you talk to Palestinians and you talk to Israelis and you ask them to draw, if you asked Miko to draw his country and you asked me to draw my country, we would draw the same thing. Okay? So there's no sort of existential difference between what we think our country. In fact, if you go to the Israeli Ministry of Tourism website, there's no lines around the Gaza Strip. Around the West Bank. And they have some sort of delineation around the Gaza Strip, but there's no lines around. In their eyes, officially, the West Bank is not disputed or even occupied or whatever. So let's not split the baby in half. If you ask, that's number one. If you ask Palestinians and Israelis to draw their country, we both draw that triangle that you see Palestinians wearing around their necks or tattooing on their bodies or whatever. Number 2, and the next few are more practical. The financial system wouldn't need to change. Currently, the Israeli financial system is in effect in all of historic Palestine, including the West Bank, and even including in the, terrorist-run Gaza Strip. They made it sound like Hamas took over and implemented their own system and all that kind of stuff. That's just not true. Gaza Strip is still obviously under full occupation. It's under a blockade. Israel decides everything that gets in and out, including people. And the currency system to this day is the Israeli currency system, the Israeli financial system. Along with currency, infrastructure is all Israeli. So, for instance, Palestinian cell phone companies basically buy bandwidth from Israeli cell phones, because Israel owns all the bandwidth. And they buy bandwidth from Israeli cell phone companies and resell it to Palestinians in the West Bank. A Palestinian in the West Bank, a stateless Palestinian in the West Bank pays more for his cell phone bill every month than an Israeli does who lives in Tel Aviv, because they're buying it from, it's not theirs. So they're resellers. So the infrastructure from the point of view of currency and data, water, electricity. Israel can flip a switch and shut off the electricity in Gaza Strip. Why? Because they run everything. Okay? So the infrastructure would not need to change. You wouldn't need to all of a sudden set up a new thing for a new territory. Thank you. Third, one state would solve the issue of settlements in a weird way. Settlements would not be settlements anymore. They would be part of one state. And so settlers would just be now living in this whole new one state. They wouldn't need to go. There might need to be obviously many issues addressed about land expropriation, confiscation, compensation, those kinds of things. But there would not be any more talk of anybody needing to go anywhere. 4, the issue of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, let me put on like my nerdy law professor hat for 1 second. So Jerusalem, since 1948, has been this thing, this Latin term that they use to describe the legal status of it, called corpus separatum. which means that has its own special legal status. The entire city, by the way, not just the east side or the west side, the entire city, and is no one's sovereignty over it is recognized. Okay, that's the entire city. In the UN partition plan, Jerusalem was envisioned as sort of like an international thing, and that's never changed from the point of view of policies of every state in the world. That is why, even though Israel declares Jerusalem as its capital, that no one locates their embassies there. Okay, even in West Jerusalem, no one locates embassies there. Everyone locates their embassies in Tel Aviv because, again, the issue of recognition. You don't just, the way the world works in internet, you don't just get up and say this is our capital and these are our borders. You can ask other countries or through the UN to recognize these things. And the UN has never recognized that Jerusalem is part of anywhere, okay, that it's this corpus separatum. That's why, if you might have remembered, a few years ago there was a Supreme Court case where an American family of Jewish descent had their kids in Jerusalem, and they wanted their American passport to say that their place of birth was Israel. And the State Department refused, because that's American policy, is that anyone that's born in Jerusalem is born in a place called Jerusalem. They're not born in a country. They're not born in a nation called Israel. Okay, east or west, by the way. It's a whole city. But one state would solve this problem. I mean, if this new one state of Palestinians and Israelis got together and said, hey, we would like Jerusalem to be part of our state and be our capital, the whole world would agree. No problem. You can make it your state, make it your capital. It no longer needs to be under dispute. And it can be the eternal capital, as Benjamin Netanyahu likes to call it, of this new state. Not the eternal undivided capital of Jewish people, no. The eternal capital of this new state, if we like. So Jerusalem would be solved. Number 5. There's a demographic problem in Israel, well, for Israel, in Israel. Palestinians, how can I say this nicely? We reproduce a lot, okay? And we love each other very much, okay? And this is a reality and a problem for Israel that they can't deal with. And so, for instance, in 1948, when Israel expelled about 750,000 Palestinians, my father among them, and these became refugees around the world, and descendants of these refugees around the world, 150,000 Palestinians remained in what is today Israel, not counting the West Bank and Gaza Strip. 150,000 Palestinians remained. If they would have grown at the normal average global birth rate of the world, after 69 years they would be mathematically around 450,000 people. They are currently 1.7 million people. Okay? Gaza Strip has the same thing. They were 180,000 people in 1948. Now they're hitting 1.8 million people. So this sort of demographics is something, again, that Israel has not come to terms with. They're kind of ignoring this. In fact, there's a whole billboard campaign happening around Tel Aviv. I'm sure Miko saw it. A whole billboard campaign happening mostly in Tel Aviv, but in most of Israel as well, but especially around Tel Aviv. That is this big billboard with a bunch of, like a crowd full of Palestinians, and it says in Arabic it says "Qariban sanakun al-aghlabiyya," which means in English, pretty soon we'll be the majority. Okay? Then it has like a little phone number to call, and if you call the phone number, somebody picks up and starts speaking to you. Somebody from the left in Israel starts picking up and starts speaking to you in Hebrew that says, we better give the Palestinians a state, otherwise this is what's going to happen. Okay?
Don't the Orthodox Jews reproduce a lot?
No, but they do, but they're a very small amount of the population. Well, we are, in other words, the high reproduction rates among Jewish residents inside all of historic Palestine, the high reproduction rate is low among the greater population. That's not true for us. So if you ask a Palestinian, like, how many kids you have, he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you say to him, how old are they? He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so so it is. It's very common now. the newer generations now maybe are having like 2 or 3 kids, but the generation of even my parents and people younger than my parents, it was very common to have 6, 7, 8 kids, and everyone was doing it. Okay, so I mean, it's like exponentially, So my mom's mom is one of 19. Okay, and so my mom has something in the neighborhood of 100 first cousins. First, okay, and so you just can't, and you just can't like catch up with that. Okay, so even if my generation is having 2 kids, it doesn't matter. It's too late. Like it's already happened. Okay, you can't reverse it. Just like in America, by the way. I mean, like a lot of Trump's thing was trying to reverse the demographic flow of America, but it's too late. So you can't do anything about it anymore. The brownification of America is happening, and you're either with it or you're not, but you can't stop it, right? It's like the Titanic, right? The Titanic was in the ocean, and it hit an iceberg. And then a few hours later, they realized that there's a problem, right? Like water was coming on, now there's a problem, and a few hours after that, it was in the bottom of the ocean. But even though they realized it a few hours later, it didn't matter. It was over when it hit the iceberg, okay? It was over. And they're in the middle of the ocean, nowhere to help them. Well, same thing happening with the demographics inside Israel. And the other demographic problem that they have is that the issue of Israeli identity is falling apart. The idea of Israel is like a European sort of like enclave in the Middle East. This is false too, because now you have about 6 million Israeli Jews. Among those 6 million, you have, it started out with white, Israel was a white European colonial thing, right? Started out like that. Well, it turns out when they got there, it turns out that this whole thing of like land without a people, well, it turns out that's not true. So it turns out there was a lot of people there. So they had a demographic problem from the beginning. All right? And they brought European Jews, but that was not enough. All right? So then they started bringing Arab Jews in 49 and 50 in the 50s. Yemen, Iraq, Tunisia, Morocco, whatever, from all over. They brought all them. Now, the idea of Israel doesn't really want these people, right? But you need them because you have a demographic problem. Then they still didn't have enough. So in the 70s and 80s, they got Ethiopian Jews. Now, the idea of Israel for sure does not like Africans, for sure, but numbers and PR. Then they still didn't have enough. So then they went to Russia in the 90s, and they said, hey, if you have like one grandparent that's Jewish, come on down. And 1 million came. Now they've been there for 25 or 30 years. The Israeli Jews of Russian descent have been there for 25 or 30 years, and they're more comfortable in society. And guess what they're doing? They're building churches. They are marrying Arab Christians. They're being buried in Arab Christian cemeteries, and they're speaking Russian. Because guess what? They're not Jews. They never saw themselves as Jews, but they saw a ticket out of the failing Soviet Union, free house, free job, whatever. And so one of the smallest numbers, I don't want to say the smallest, but a minority among minorities now is sort of the original Zionist Jews of European descent. And so what that means is, for instance, the amount of people who currently speak Hebrew as the native, like the really first native tongue in their house all the time, is really not that many people. The Arab Jews are speaking Arabic. Everyone speaks Hebrew, obviously, but the Arab Jews are speaking Arabic. In fact, the most popular band inside Israel right now is a band called Yemen Blues, who are the grandchildren of Yemeni immigrants from the late 40s and 50s, and they're singing in Arabic. It's the most popular band in Israel. So what does that mean? That means that they did not lose their culture. They didn't become Europeanized, right? They stayed Arabs, and which makes sense because they moved from an Arab land to an Arab land, right? It's like moving from California to Texas. You're not changing much, okay? And so they kept their culture there, and they're now the most popular band inside Israel. And being Arab, I should say here, is it's like contagious. Like you can't go somewhere and hang out, and you just can't turn. It's been Arab for 1,500 years. You cannot. Nothing you can do in 40, 50 years of 60, whatever, of occupation changes that. If you're in the old city of Jerusalem and you want to conduct business and you don't want to get cheated, you need to speak Arabic. You speak any other language, you're going to get cheated because you're a tourist, right? So it's an Arab place, and it has been, and it will remain. So all these demographic issues that I'm talking about, right? Now, again, well, it's only an issue to you, it's only a problem for you if you're a racist or if you believe in ethnic supremacy in the state. If you don't, then it's not a problem, and you can have a nice secular democratic state where everybody's equal. So all these demographic arguments and stuff, if you have a secular democratic state, get thrown aside. Finally, the economy. Number 6 is the economy. Palestine is, okay, the Gulf states have a resource, oil. They're making a lot of money off of it. But they're encountering problems. It has fluctuating prices, and it runs out one day. Palestine, because God chose Palestine for whatever reason, and it is our natural resource is God. Okay? It brings millions and millions and millions of people to Palestine every year. And because of the nature of God, it is a renewable, never diminishing resource. Okay? What's that mean? That means if all of a sudden the land got opened up to the whole world. So right now there's, approaching 2 billion Muslims in the world, most of whom never visit because of either political reasons or they don't have diplomatic relations with whatever it might be. Imagine if the whole world was open to them. I mean, you need to build 50 hotels in Jerusalem and 50 hotels in Nazareth. You would have to imagine if Lebanese and Syrians could just drive in, how much money they would spend. I mean, Palestine would be the most self-sufficient tourist economy in the world. Okay? But it can't be that now because of Israel. But if it were totally opened up, I mean, no one would be wanting for anything there. Doing a one state, though, means sacrifices, small sacrifices for both Palestinians and Israel. Well, not small, pretty big emotional sacrifices. There's not going to be a Palestinian state, and there's not going to be a Jewish state. There's going to be one state. No more talking about a state here where these people live over here and these people live over there. So no ethnic separation, no state. We'd have to change some things. We'd have to change the flag. Obviously, it's a little, it's a little exclusive. I would change it to something. Maybe like 3 stripes of like brown, green, brown to represent like a falafel patty or something like that. But it would have to change. But these are logistical things, not a big deal. You'd have to change the name of the place, probably. Probably can't call it Israel, although I don't really care. But I mean, I would imagine just to, you don't call it Israel, call it like Holy Land or Abrahamistan or just call the whole thing Jerusalem or just call the whole thing Jerusalem. Yeah, or I mean, I don't know if this would be a problem for Miko or other Jews in the room. We just keep calling it Palestine. It's already a Jewish name, right? Stein. And we could even respell it, if we have to. But there is, we'd have to do some of these things, change some of these things. But I say to people who are living in the land of Palestine, let's do it. Let's make one secular democratic state. Everyone has to give up some of these existential emotional ideas. No big deal, but we can get rich together, all right? And we can finally go more quickly to the future that's coming to us anyway. I mean, the idea of there being some sort of separate Palestinian state is never going to happen, even among liberal, quote-unquote liberal Zionists inside Israel. And I'll end by saying, if you watch the discourse in Israel, you'll see that those on the right say, let's figure out how to take all the land, okay? Bennett, Netanyahu, these people. Let's figure out how to take all the land and give the Palestinians some sort of status so that we don't have to deal with them. But let's figure out how to take all the land because we don't want to live with the Palestinians. And the ones on the left say, well, no, let's give them like 20% of historic Palestine so that they live over here and we live over there because, again, we don't want to live with the Palestinians. Okay? I'm saying, we can do away with all of that. Palestinians, if you follow Palestinian thought over the last 30 years or so, we've stopped with all the stuff of like, up in the 80s, we stopped. When we have conversations with each other, our conversations are basically about whatever's going to happen is we're going to have to, figure out a way to live with these people. Whatever happens, nobody's probably going anywhere. Unfortunately, in Israel, they're still having conversations about how to get rid of us. And like I said, they're not very good at it. Okay, so they're going to have to come to terms with all of these things. So I'll stop for now. I know I went. I'll stop for now.